Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday. It is the 14th of October. So it's Wednesday of the 28th week in Ordinary Time, but it's also an optional memorial. Today, St. Callistus the First, Pope and Martyr. So we're going back into the early days of the church for this one. So for some reason, I'm always fascinated by these very early saint or feasts of saints who are from the very early days of the church, the first few centuries. Um, but I know it's kind of strange to do a Wednesday morning, usually because I do the Wednesday evening stream of benediction, that I forego the Wednesday morning. But I think it was maybe in the conference we had at the beginning of the month on the new evangelization. Somebody asked about social media and the number of times that you're supposed to be posting things. Now, I don't think it's these live kind of things, but just the number of times that that they recommend to really keep people engaged is pretty high. So that's why I thought, oh, I can also do one on Wednesday mornings too. But we'll still have starting at 6:30 this evening. We'll live stream adoration, and it closes with benediction about 10 till 7. So that's coming up later today. But as I said, we have an optional memorial today that goes back into the early 3rd century, so the early 200s, for this saint, Pope Callistus I, Pope and Martyr. And what kind of struck me, he has kind of an interesting story. Now, as one of my sources will say, is that some of the information about his life comes to us from Saint Hippolytus, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, except Callistus and Hippolytus did not really get along very well. They had some disagreements about church discipline, not necessarily, not on anything, any fundamentals of the faith, but sometimes about how that is applied. And I just thought, well, and we still have those disagreements 2,000 years later on some of the disciplines of the church. So the more things change, the more they stay the same, I guess, or things are pretty much people are people, I guess, all throughout history. But part of the other thing that's interesting about St. Callistus is that he was a slave at one point. I think he was a slave for a Christian, worked in his household, and something went wrong with his administration of funds or something like that. And so a lot of the clients of his master lost a lot of money. And so he was obviously kind of sort of sent into exile, maybe is a decent way of putting it, but he was punished for that. Ends up being sent to, I think it was the salt mines of Sardinia, but it says like in the mines of Sardinia. So that was kind of, he was, I think, sentenced to hard labor. Well, at one point, while he's in this prison camp or doing this hard labor, there is all the there's a pardon for all of these prisoners. The emperor pardons them. So Callistus comes back to Rome now, being pardoned, and he. I'm not sure exactly how. Obviously, we're going back, quite a long time, but he ends up being kind of being the caretaker for a Christian cemetery. In fact, that cemetery still exists, and it's called the Cemetery of St. Callistus now. It was on the Appian Way, I believe. And the Pope at that time, Zephyrinus, he kind of Callistus comes under kind of his wing, and so Pope Zephyrinus ordains Callistus as a deacon, puts him in charge of this cemetery, and as a deacon too in the early church, he would have had responsibilities for caring for the poor and the sick, widows, orphans, those kind of things. And it sounds, and he acquits himself as a very good administrator for these things, to the point where he is then elected pope eventually, about the year 217. This gives you an idea of where we are. But he had one of the things that I think he and Hippolytus and others, Tertullian was another one, that there was the controversy of those, especially in times of persecution, who would give up the faith. They would not be martyred. They wouldn't give up their lives. They would reject the faith. And then after the persecution ends, they want to come back to the church. And how does that work? That was something that the early church had to deal with, is what does that process look like? Now, there would be some, I'm not sure how hardline Hippolytus and Tertullian were. They were more hardline than Callistus. There were some who said, they could not come back at all. There was kind of that extreme, and and then probably to the other side where maybe it was just a simple process. But there was that time of penance. That's maybe when we start getting into Lent, we see the Lenten season being that time of penance for sinners. So especially these public sinners, there was a little bit of controversy there on exactly what the process was for bringing them back into communion with the church. There would be some that said they should be rebaptized because they had, in a way, kind of thrown away baptism. But the church concludes very quickly, though, that baptism, it leaves, as we call that, indelible mark upon the soul. So you can't ever lose your baptism. You can not live it out, and obviously public sinners, at that time, those who were, disregarding the faith, or disavowing the faith, they would fall under those public sinners. But they did not lose their baptism. So Callistus tended to be a little bit more lenient than Hippolytus and Tertullian thought he should be on some of those. But eventually he is martyred. It was around the year 222. But there's not really a whole lot of information as to exactly how that happened or why that happened. But one of the interesting parts, I'll close with this, I found this interesting, that he's buried on the Aurelian Way, which is kind of strange since he's not buried doesn't sound like he's buried in the cemetery of St. Callistus, the one he took care of. But his tomb was discovered in 1960. It contains 6th century frescoes of his martyrdom. The Roman church of St. Callistus may be on the site of an earlier church built by Callistus himself on land granted by the emperor to the Christians rather than to some innkeepers. This is the interesting part of the story. The emperor at that time, Alexander Severus, is supposed to have declared that it would be preferable to have the rites of any religion on the site rather than a tavern. So, yes, that Church of St. Callistus was built, or that site at least was dedicated for a church instead of being used for a tavern. So, found that kind of interesting. So, again, we'll kind of end on that note. We'll have a live stream of the last half hour of adoration that closes with benediction. We'll start live streaming at 6:30. Benediction begins right around 10 till 7, concludes right around 7 o'clock. So hope everyone has a wonderful day. We'll continue to look out for each other. Let's continue to pray for each other. And I pray that God will bless you abundantly this day. Have a great day, everyone.